Welcome back. Today I want to talk about the work of establishing oneself in truth or in source consciousness, or more specifically today about samadhi. So we've been talking before about witnessing and absorption as main yogic principles that help us learn all the things that we're not and let go of those so that instead we can see our true nature. And before we go any deeper, I just want to clear a potential misconception that I've even heard yoga teachers say, which is that the observer mode itself would be our direct connection with the divine. And in my perspective, one could equally say that it is not. Bear with me just a minute. Because the observer mode, as we know it when we go about our everyday lives, all that means is that we're able to zoom out enough from our experience that we can see all the events, all the thoughts, all the emotions, all the situations, all the people as kind of a river passing by that we can choose to engage in, but we do not compulsively have to engage in. This is all that witnessing means. It does not mean that we're having a direct experience of yogic blissfulness, which is the nature of source. And so if we're not having that direct experience, then, well, one might say that it is true that we're always divinely connected, we're always divinely aware no matter what we do, but we're not having that direct source experience. So the question would be, how do we go from this witnessing to actually experiencing that direct experience of our true nature, of blissfulness? And the short and silly answer would be go through a Kundalini awakening. But to be a little bit more serious and still short, the work is to keep practicing witnessing and also to keep practicing focused attention so as to become more and more able, more and more capable to hold that space of absorption in our consciousness. And when it comes to witnessing, staying humble actually helps us on our path. If we learn to really truly accept exactly where we are, usually for most of us, our day-to-day experience isn't all that blissful. And so we can remember that we still have all of this coloring, all of this filters to our experience that I talked about in the last episode on samadhi, with our past memories, our past experiences shaping how we see the world today and seeing our experience today. We still have all of that coloring to work on, and that's okay. So that acceptance is a great propellant to move forwards. And the other thing is with absorption, to stay humble with that as well. In that absorption, full yogic absorption is actually a very advanced state. And again, it is better for us to be so humble that we can start exactly where we are, which might be to just practice focus, to just practice concentrating on something. And again, I've said it before, at this stage, it doesn't really matter what you focus on. So it could be the bodily sensations in yoga asana, or just sitting with the bodily sensations. Or it could be energy, your energy movements in energy work, or it could be breath and breath practice. Or it could be an emotion, or it could be anything else. So much of what we call spiritual practice is about this. It is a practice to learn to become as present with and as focused on one thing that you possibly can. And in an upcoming episode, I will share with you one method that I share with just about everyone because it's so incredibly powerful and beneficial in so many ways that you could use as your method of practicing focus. Of course, it doesn't matter. It depends on your disposition, what you're willing and able to focus the best on. So today I won't focus on methods, but before we go more into the topic today, which is samadhi, I will just mention one overarching principle with any method of awakening. So whatever you choose to practice your ability to focus, to practice your ability to surrender into absorption, that is a vehicle, and you must use that vehicle for as far as it can take you if you commit to that vehicle, and then let it go. So for example, let's take a focus on the breath. So a person who chooses to use the breath as a vehicle for awakening is in for the learning journey of exploring the breath so fully and so unconditionally that eventually leads to this heartfelt understanding of the essence of the breath. Once you become the breath, you have that experience, there is nothing more for you to learn there, and so it becomes natural, it becomes self-guided to realize that it is time to let the vehicle of the breath go. And that's when you naturally move into samadhi. You don't have to do any work to do that. The only work you do is to keep exploring it as deeply and as fully, going into absorption until there is nothing more in that experience for you. I'll give you another example because it will help illustrate the next part of this episode, and that is absorption in nature. Some of you will surely have experienced this. You sit for a long time out in nature and you're observing nature and you're finding peace or joy in the simple act of just observing nature. And so your mind might be going between observing the gross physical aspects of nature and the abstract aspects such as beauty or impermanence. And so your mind can be occupied with that for hours, and it's a way of observing. But then something happens. So eventually you just feel yourself letting go, and you feel that you are not actively observing anymore, you're just more floating into the whole experience. You feel like the boundaries between yourself as a human being and the nature around you just blurs, and you feel like you're becoming one with it. And also the concept of time seems to not be relevant anymore. You're just really absorbed in that experience. So what you've done again is to use this vehicle of focus on nature, observing nature to its end point where you've let it go. And that allows you to have a more direct, more true experience of your observing nature. And I mention this for several reasons. First of all, what I just mentioned, to learn to recognize that what we see as the observer mode in our everyday life is just the beginning. It's still a clouded sense of observing, and it's only when you can totally let your mind structures go and be in absorption that you begin to learn what unconditional witnessing is really about. And I also mention this because that glimpse of absorption that we may have had out in nature, for example, is relatively easy to obtain. And what I mean with that is that we don't need much knowledge, we don't need much inner work to have the grace of that experience. All we need is beneficial circumstances, that we're willing to spend the time with something, and we're capable to let ourselves go. And that can happen spontaneously. And we can even help ourselves induce this experience without any yogic knowledge, just by creating those beneficial circumstances for it. And it can actually be easier to have these kind of spontaneous first tastes of absorption without having any spiritual framework for it, because the framework gets in the way, right? So if we know that something can happen, we might put pressure on ourselves to experience something, which is the opposite of surrendering into that experience. Or the mind can become rigid about a framework saying how something is supposed to be done, and so we cannot let go of the vehicle because we're so trained to hold on to that vehicle. And so it really serves us to keep cultivating that childlike mind where we really don't know. We don't know what will happen, we don't know how it will happen, even after many, many years of practice, keeping that mindset that this is a new experience and we don't know. So you can definitely have very true experiences of this oneness, of divine love, of true blissfulness, even though in your day-to-day life your mind is still very active. I have definitely had my fair share of a love so all-encompassing that it fills not just my body but everything around me as well, and there is just nothing else but this love. But it disappears again with time. It becomes a faint memory, and that is because those colorings to the mind, to the perception, are still there. So the kind of absorption I just described would be considered the first stage of Samadhi, Savikalpa Samadhi. And there are sub-stages within Savikalpa, but what really marks this stage is that while the mind is silent within that experience, you then come back to everyday life and you recognize there is a whole lot of integration to do between that experience of mind silence and the now very clear turmoil that is the rest of your life. And so integrating those two experiences is the work you see now that you have to do. Now, there are higher states of samadhi, such as Nirvikalpa, in which there are no more samskaras. In other words, you have released all attachments to this world, and there are no filters to your perception anymore. And because the mind then is silent, there's nothing left to focus on. So you're left dwelling in the awareness of the infinite, loving nature, blissfulness nature that you are. And this is the state where truly the observer, the observed, the act of observing all merges into one. And you are just dwelling in that experience of infinite love, of infinite bliss that you are. So Nirvikalpa is among the highest states of liberation that we as humans can experience. It's literally the dissolving of all movements in the mind. And so a word of wisdom from experience, please don't hold yourself to too high standards. Even Patanjali advised us to choose our level of commitment to one that we're happy with and comfortable with, because if we put too high pressure on ourselves, then we cannot enjoy the journey and we cannot experience that liberation that we're looking for. So it's better to, again, stay humble with where we are and cultivate contentment with that. That contentment will help us go further on our journey. And also it's said that we can't even really induce Nirvikalpa. All we can do is to keep chipping away at all those things that we're not and keep releasing all those things that we're not in whatever way works for you. And that will eventually clear, or as you always say, purify your mind enough to experience that state. Now, on the other hand, I'm sure we all wonder at some point, is it really possible? Is it really meaningful for me to aspire to that kind of state of liberation when I didn't grow up in an ashram? I don't have decades of training in a spiritual framework. So is that even something that I should be looking at? And if you do feel that it is impossible in this lifetime, yes, then probably it is impossible, at least for as long as you believe that. But I do have 3 messages of hope to counter that thought. First, if you feel that strong urge or an insatiable curiosity to follow your own awakening and see where that may lead you, or you have a very strong devotion to love, then those desires are there for a reason and your life force knows exactly what it's doing. It wouldn't place that desire in you without it having a great benefit for you. So the best thing you can do is to follow that curiosity for yourself and for all of us. And if you do, then what you desire is possible for you. The second message of hope is a lesson that the yogic masters who experienced Nirvikalpa has learned and taught us. That is that this blissfulness is a part of all of us, all the time. It is, so to say, always on, and it could never not be because it is our essential nature. And that means you are experiencing it right now. You may not be feeling like it, and that is again because your mind is so busy. But doesn't that give you a more positive motivation to quiet your mind? You see, we so often try to quiet our mind from a space of fear. We're so fed up with the noise, the distraction, the non-pleasantness in the mind, so we try to kind of push it to silence or run away from it. But what if instead we let that curiosity lead, that curiosity that if we're just silent enough, we can experience that blissfulness, right? So this is the space that I want us all to be established in, that we are so accepting of our mind state, of the way our mind functions, that we do not have to run away from it. That's not our focus. Our focus is simply on the joyful part of establishing ourselves in our own truth. The third message of hope that I have for your liberation today is what the Bhakti practitioners would call the shortcut to God or to Source, and that is love. If you can focus on loving God or Source or any person, being, or thing as an incarnation of the divine itself, if you can hold that focus on love, then you might be able to experience divine union without having to go through all those decades of practicing to focus, practicing letting go, because you're naturally letting go into love. And focus on love naturally shifts our reliance on the mind to learning to trust and rely on the heart. And the heart is a tremendously powerful purifier when active. Of course, it's still a practice. Now we're then on a journey to find all the ways in which our heart is closing down and we're not letting our heart lead. And it's still a practice of bringing our focus back to love again and again. It's just that it's more natural for us to love, as that is who we are as humans. So if we can find that one thing, maybe a person or a being, and direct our love to that as if that is our divine love, then we're already on our way. So when I say we needn't necessarily be yogis to experience Kundalini awakening, this is how I've seen it work. Life has happened to us in such a way that this yearning for deeper love, this yearning for fuller experience of life in some way, that has awakened within us and that drives us. And love, that passion, becomes our teacher. It becomes our teacher to love deeper, to surrender more into love. And the more we open our minds to it, the more life itself teaches us all that we need to know to surrender to it. So back to Samadhi, whatever route you take, even if Nirvikalpa Samadhi seems far off, Savikalpa Samadhi actually isn't, and making space for it in your life can actually be very beneficial for your journey ahead. So ideally, we'll find this balance between making space for joyful absorption on one hand, and making space for this heavy lifting work of letting go of all that we're not on the other hand. And of course, the more we do that work, the more accessible we'll find it to be to go back into absorption. And sometimes all it takes is just one deep dive into the roots of our suffering for us to be able to emerge into the bliss on the other side. And this is part of what I live for. I have seen in my work, once we get to the root of something, then spontaneously on the other side, that absorption, that bliss can come forth. And when I see it, I know that for that person, it is the beginning of something new and of something wonderful. And of course, it doesn't mean that the journey just suddenly gets easier. It will keep going up and down as we learn to establish ourselves in the heart, as we first go through all the purgings and find a relief on the other side, and we establish ourselves more into peace and more into joyfulness, and our heart warms up to love deeper than before. Eventually there comes a point when the mind has clarity enough to bow down to the heart, to let the heart lead. And when we're at that point, then that bliss is not far away. Now, honestly, I can't tell you how exactly you might tackle the challenge to calm your mind, because it can happen in so many ways. For me, it's happened in so many ways, and I've shared some of the most powerful ones in previous episodes already. And as I mentioned in the next episode, I will share another powerful tool that I have used. But the combination of tools and to what extent you need them, that will inevitably be unique for you. So the best advice that I can give you around that is follow your curiosity, learn to trust your own intuition, and learn to trust your body. Your body and your curiosity, those two never lie. So even if the mind can in a myriad of ways, it's safe to trust your body and your curiosity. So a quick recap. First, the observer state is not necessarily a direct experience of your divine nature, but you can approach that experience, that blissfulness, by practicing witnessing and by practicing concentration, so that you can become better and better at surrendering into absorption. And whatever vehicle you use to develop your ability to focus and surrender into absorption, follow it to its endpoint, but then leave it behind, because any vehicle is still a structure of the mind and cannot follow you into states of deeper absorption. Now, the deepest states are only available when the mind is completely silent, but don't lose hope, because that blissfulness is in fact always present with you, even now. And if you have the desire to experience it, then you can. And if you want to make it easier for yourself, focus on love. Devote yourself to love, because heart awakening is the most powerful path to awakening to source awareness. This was all for today. I hope it was interesting to you. Please do share your experiences below. I'm always delighted to hear from you. And if you do like this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more. I'm so grateful that you joined me today, and I hope to see you next time. Namaste.